Thank you. All right, is this on? Yes, it is. Okay, hi everybody. I want to start by telling you guys a story that ended with 13 amazing companies working together in one building from around the world. And then that same story is the beginning of another story that we will then get to all explore together. As mentioned, we are a venture capital firm focused on the early stage. And one of the things that we noticed when we were investing was that more and more great companies are started by people who enjoy working out of an accelerator to the extent that they get to build their network, they get to get advice and mentorship, and really get a lot of the support and resources that they otherwise would not be able to get at a really early stage. So at Rothenberg Ventures, one of the things that we did was we started an accelerator where some of our companies can work out of the office with us. So the story has four main characters. The first is a university student in Japan who is unable to use his arms and his fingers due to muscular dystrophy, and a technology that gave the ability to do things like play the piano back to the student. The technology of virtual reality here in this case is used by a company, is made by a company called Fove, which does eye tracking, so that when the student has the headset on and looks at the right keys, they can play the piano, even to the point of performing a live concert with his friends. On the other side of the world, in Spain, there's a young man who was actually terrified of getting onto subway trains, and for 10 years was unable to use the method that was most convenient due to this fear. And thanks to a technology called virtual reality and a company called Sios, this young man was able to practice in a safe environment things like getting on and off of a train through a simulated environment, to the point where the quality of his life was forever changed by being able to be able to travel like that. The third person is in America and in Los Angeles, and has you know what, I'll save that one for last. The third one is in Washington. So in hospitals, pain management is a pretty big deal, especially when it comes to chronic pain. And there are people who suffer from burns, and the method for changing bandages every day is incredibly excruciating. And right now, the way that that's handled is typically with morphine. And there are people in Washington now, thanks to a company called Deepstream, that can, once again, through virtual reality, immerse themselves in another world, and the pain doesn't go away, but the perceived pain is diminished considerably to the point, the same extent as morphine, by transmitting somebody to another world while they're going through their bandage changes. And then the fourth story illustrates one of the reasons why we became aware of this technology to begin with, which is a company in LA called Emblematic Group, which does immersive journalism. And when they tell stories by physically putting their audience in another environment, they have had reactions that have been very extreme and powerful, to the point of even crying, because the empathy is so strong. So I mention these things to start off because I want to mention why virtual reality is so important. I also want to acknowledge how early we are in this ecosystem. VR is a powerful, inevitable technology. It's already here. It will, if you take nothing else away from this talk, please note that virtual reality is, not only is it attracting hundreds of millions of dollars of investments, really on a accelerating pace, but it is the inevitable next platform after mobile. And I'll try to make some more statements as to why that is. So there's this dude named Palmer Luckey that a lot of people have heard about by now, who thought that virtual reality was a neat technology. Virtual reality has been around for decades, and the term itself was actually coined in 1980. And so and VR has had several false starts. There have been multiple waves of people trying things like some forms of virtual reality, even attracting investments. And so the idea, the concept, the perception of its power is nothing new. But what has happened over the last 2 or 3 years is a convergence of technology that has solved the supply side problem, meaning we can, in a relatively inexpensive way, experience virtual reality with a headset that has high enough density in the pixelations, fast enough processing speed, and the memory and infrastructure to support a real-time rendering as we move our head. That's the whole key to virtual reality, is immersion. When you put this on, and then you're watching a screen effectively, and as you move your head, the screen has to actually render the world as fast as your brain can compute it, which is pretty fast, but it's not perfectly instant, which is why we have that window where we can create an experience. So this guy created this thing, decided that he would try to get funding through Kickstarter. It was wildly successful, so he started to get to build it, attracted some investments. Facebook bought it, and that helped raise awareness for virtual reality as an effective technology. And in fact, Oculus partnered with Samsung to create the first affordable mobile consumer experience, which is called the Samsung Gear VR. And probably most of you have seen one of these things by now. But what's really powerful about this is that with your cell phone, which if you have a smartphone, you have a virtual reality machine, you can actually, with this essentially dongle, but they charge a couple $100 for it, but you can go all the way down to a $5 Google Cardboard, or you can go up to whatever they're going to price the Oculus Rift at. The dev kits are something like $350, and we'll see what happens. Yesterday, in fact, the Oculus announced that they were going to be going to market in Q1 of next year, so that's inevitable too. But what we see is that all of the major tech companies are actually putting in hundreds of millions, if not billions, into building out virtual reality and augmented reality ecosystem. And we're in year, if you call this year 0, even though it's probably year 30 or 40, this will still happen. This building of this ecosystem, both on the supply side with virtual reality and augmented reality converging, and on the demand side, which is essentially recreating every experience we would ever want to have in life, which could take a while. This is going to happen for the rest of all of our lives. So this is not something that's a wave and then it's done. Just like the internet is inevitably around for the rest of our lives, and so is mobile, so is virtual reality. And what's interesting is that in 1994, when Netscape came out, people started calling everybody who created a website a .com, no matter what their product and service really was. If you had a website, you were a .com. And just like the internet was nascent in 1994 and is now ubiquitous, we think that virtual reality is nascent today and will be ubiquitous. And the analogy here is, Priceline, that used to be a .com, an internet site, and guess what? They still have an internet site, and now they're a travel agency. Company we invest in called SolarX is people call that a VR application. They bucket into this big group of virtual reality, which is true, but it's actually an education company that happens to use this incredibly powerful technology, as is the case with all of the virtual reality companies. So analysts are paid to do things like make big projections, and one of the things that they have decided will grow the most over the next 5 years is virtual reality. I do want to kind of highlight where it is today. It's in 2015, which is barely a bump on these charts, and yet $10 billion is what they're projecting in 5 years for software and hardware sales. That's UBS, and then on the right side, it's about shipments. So, we know that the supply side is coming. There will be millions, and there are millions and millions of headsets being built, and the demand side has to catch up. Talk about that soon. So that's the world that we live in, and one of the things I want to touch on is why we started to get excited about it. And so the Samsung Gear VR came out in October of last year, and that was the moment when we realized that everybody already has a virtual reality headset. If you have one of these, you have a virtual reality headset in your pocket. And that made a very powerful point. And then we started to look around, see if anybody was really investing in VR very much. No, they weren't. There was like here or there was something. And so there was this disconnect of there's this amazing, powerful, immersive experience that can and does change people's lives, and people aren't really investing in it. And so we wanted to know, okay, where's the disconnect? So we showed VR to 1,000 people. I think by now it's 10,000. And we actually, I think I've personally shown 500 to 1,000 demos of people of all kinds from everywhere and all ages, various, from really early adopters to super late adopters. I like to tease my dad for that because when we were growing up, I had things like a record player and it took me like a long time to get to a pager and things like that. And so then when he tried virtual reality and he said, "This is amazing. I want to have some more experiences like that," then I really knew this was here to stay. But we enjoy showing virtual reality people. Some of you might recognize this guy. That's Dave. And just a quick thank you to 500 Startups for letting us talk about VR here. We are very excited about this topic, as you can tell. So in the accelerator that we have, one of the hypotheses we wanted to test was, is this more than just the hardware and the technology? On the supply side, is there also content and are there things being built that matter? And yes, actually, even today, gaming and entertainment leads the way, and it probably will continue to do so for quite some time on the content side, and it should. But there are effective revenue-generating business models in other sectors in virtual reality today, because what these companies are building are solving actual human needs, services and products that we already are buying, but now they're actually using this technology of virtual reality. So that touches even, these are companies we've invested in, that touches healthcare, social communication, education, enterprise, and also, of course, the hardware and the deep tech. So where does that leave us right now? So we're at the very early stage of this. So this is where it's appropriate for early stage investors to be making very careful investments. When we started the accelerator, we put out a call to action and ended up with more than 200 applications. And so even today, we believe that there are approaching, if not already, 1,000 companies across the world that are building virtual reality technology and content of various kinds. And so this is the time when the early stage investors were making their investments. And of course, there are things like Magic Leap, which famously had $500 million in funding, and there are things like the Oculus Rift, which got acquired for $2 billion. So we're not so early in this that we don't have proof points, but I want to simultaneously call out the world we live in and the world that we could live in. And so the world that we could live in is a world where even if you're bedridden, if you're in a nursing home or for whatever reason you're immobile, you can still travel the world as though you're there by putting on a virtual reality headset. It's a world where you can be watching an NBA game courtside with your best friend or family member who's not even in the room with you. It's a world where human engagement, remote human engagement, can be way more powerful. I want to say I hope that it doesn't displace actual personal engagements. I'm hoping that it displaces things like phone calls, Skype, things like that, and helps break down the distance barrier to nothing. Because this technology is so powerful, that some of the earlier things I mentioned about how it can change people's lives are so powerful, it has the potential to be incredibly harmful too. And I think it's really important for us to acknowledge this even at the very early stages of this technology. When we're watching movies today, we have a rating system that tries to encapsulate roughly how old we should be to watch something. But I do think there are experiences in life that you really shouldn't watch no matter what age you're at. And this is not a sort of a prudish thing. This is like a PTSD thing. And what I mean by that is the virtual reality is a system that it bypasses it bypasses almost all of your other senses, and instead it tricks your brain into thinking that you're seeing and hearing something that's happening around you. And when people try experiences that are really effective, they describe them later like they were there. They say that. They say, well, this is different than watching TV because I was there. And I'm like, well, you're standing right in front of me. You weren't really there. They're like, I know, but I was there. And it's true. You remember it like you were there. And so on the plus side, that means that if done right, then future history lessons for students all around the world should never involve reading a book. It should involve experiencing experiencing history. And then later on, you could imagine that when you get quizzed on Martin Luther King's speech, you might remember almost all of it because you were there and it was electrifying. But on the downside, if you felt like you were in a situation where of extreme violence, or somebody is, or war, or really almost anything that involves that you can get PTSD from in real life, if you feel like you're there in virtual reality, it still has the same sort of risk of being ingrained in your memory. And so we have to be careful that we understand this, and that we try to work together to create standards that make sure that we don't scar people for life. I think that on the R scale of G, PG, PG-13, I think that's maybe about a third of the way up. And I think it has to get more diversified. It's like, what's going to happen in this experience? You're going to have this, that, the other. And yet there's hope. So on the plus side, the company Sios I mentioned earlier, actually what they do is they help solve fear in general, because you can actually practice being in situations that make you nervous. So let's say that you're nervous speaking in front of a crowd, you can practice doing that in virtual reality. Otherwise, it's really hard to practice. You're either there or you're not. If you're afraid of heights, you can practice standing on a very high up and looking down. It's actually kind of terrifying. You can even jump off of the cliff and fall in virtual reality, which is quite exhilarating the second time you do it. The first time, it's terrifying. And you can imagine you're afraid of spiders. This might even be a fun kind of movie, but you can practice having the spider small on the other side of the room. They can kind of get bigger and get closer, and then you can have lots of spiders that are big and close, and eventually you created an Indiana Jones movie. But you can do all of that in VR, and it has real sustainable life effects with people who are ultimately who ultimately change their quality of life because of these things. So the future world is one of excitement and entertainment when we actually get to be the protagonist in the movies or experience what that's like. Or video games will become so immersive that they'll feel like the Matrix. The human machine interface will converge thanks to artificial reality combining with virtual reality to the point where we may not have to use screens at all. We can do overlays in real life, and that's a Minority Report type of thing. These aren't really pipe dreams. This is a matter of how long does it take and how much money does it take. It's not a matter anymore of will it happen. It's a matter of when and what are the implications. So taking it back to investing, it's a very exciting time to be investing in this space. I think we've heard a lot today about bubbles and how expensive everything is and how few opportunities there are. But there is a bright light, a blue ocean, if you will, of opportunity where if you find the right early stage VR companies and help them, as we're trying to do, and we encourage you to help us find and cultivate these companies too, then we can help create the world that we want to live in and not be passive bystanders. We can create a world where the quality of life for everybody, no matter where they are, is enhanced thanks to this thing that we have in our pocket, the decades of technology that took us to the internet and then mobile and then here. And we can all have a part in this ecosystem. So, virtual reality is here to stay. Please be a part of building it. Thank you.